First contact at Fort Horizon. High Ambassador Kethrix's crystalline exoskeleton caught the morning sunlight as she descended from the diplomatic vessel, her four primary appendages twitching with barely concealed apprehension. The Galactic Confederation had encountered many species during its 10,000 years of exploration, but none quite like the humans. Their acceptance into the interstellar community had been controversial. Ambassador, welcome to Fort Horizon. A tall human female, in what Kethrix recognized as formal military attire, approached with measured steps. I'm General Sarah Chen, Base Commander. We're honored to host the first official alien delegation to tour our training facilities. Thrix's universal translator rendered the general's words perfectly, but something in the human stance made her auxiliary nervous system pulse with ancient warning signals. These creatures had evolved on a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over, yet here they stood, reaching for the stars. The honor is ours, General Chen. Kethrix's voice modulator carefully maintained diplomatic frequencies. Behind her, her two junior observers, Tlax and Vreen, maintained proper distance while their sensory arrays recorded everything. Though I must admit, some members of the Confederation Council expressed concern about touring a military installation. General Chen's facial muscles contracted in what Kethrix's cultural briefing identified as a smile. I understand completely, but I assure you, everything you'll see today is standard training procedure. We believe in transparency with our allies. The first stop was what the humans called the basic training grounds. Kethrix's entire delegation froze in their tracks. Dozens of young humans were running through what appeared to be a deliberate recreation of a war zone. Artificial explosions rocked the ground, while training officers shouted encouragement mixed with what seemed like creative insults. Are they being attacked? Tlax's normally steady voice wavered. General Chen laughed, a sound that made Kethrix's crystalline structure vibrate uncomfortably. No, this is just the morning warm-up. We're actually taking it easy on them today because of your visit. Kethrix's primary sensor cluster swiveled to focus on the general's face, searching for signs of sarcasm. She found none. A group of trainees crawled through mud under razor wire while carrying packs that looked nearly as heavy as they were. Others scaled towering walls using nothing but their upper appendages and sheer determination. In one corner, two instructors demonstrated what they called hand-to-hand combat techniques to a group of attentive students. Your species deliberately practices causing harm to each other. Vreen asked, his data collection appendages trembling. Oh, no harm done, General Chen assured them. These are controlled exercises. We use safety equipment and careful supervision. It's all about building strength, endurance, and tactical thinking. As if on cue, a trainee lost their grip on the climbing wall and fell. Kethrix's emergency response protocols activated automatically, but before she could even extend her stabilizing limbs, the human had rolled with the impact, stood up, and started climbing again. Shouldn't they receive medical attention? Kethrix asked, her voice modulator struggling to maintain composure. For a little fall, hardly worth mentioning. Our bodies are pretty good at handling impact. General Chen led them toward a massive structure she called the Combat Simulation Center. Now, this is where things get interesting. The delegation followed, each member making private notes about updating their species' threat assessment protocols. Inside the building, they found themselves on an observation platform overlooking multiple training areas. In one section, humans practiced with various weapon systems, their movements precise and practiced. In another, a group ran through what appeared to be a holographic urban environment, coordinating their actions with hand signals and quiet commands. This facility can simulate any combat environment in our database, General Chen explained proudly. Desert warfare, Arctic conditions, urban combat, even low-gravity scenarios. We believe in preparing for every possibility. Every possibility. Kethrix's translator nearly glitched on the concept. But the variables would be infinite. Exactly. General Chen's enthusiasm made the alien delegation take an involuntary step backward. That's why we focus on teaching adaptability and quick thinking rather than just fixed responses. Watch this group here. They observed as the training scenario suddenly changed, the urban environment transforming into a dense jungle. Without missing a beat, the human team adjusted their tactics, maintaining unit cohesion despite the dramatic shift in their surroundings. Fascinating, Tlax muttered, their scientific curiosity momentarily overcoming their horror. They actually seemed to enjoy the challenge. Of course, General Chen nodded. Humans have always thrived on pushing our limits. It's how we survived on Earth, and it's how we'll make our mark in the galaxy. Cathrix's primary heart fluttered at those words. The implications were both terrifying and oddly reassuring. These humans didn't just endure hardship, they actively sought it out, learned from it, grew stronger from it. As they concluded their tour of the basic training facilities, Cathrix found herself composing the beginning of her report in her mind. Honored Council members, our previous assessments of human military capability were significantly underestimated. They don't just train warriors, they forge them through methods that would be considered extreme by any rational species standards, and perhaps most disturbingly, they consider this normal. The physical impossible. The afternoon sun beat down on Fort Horizon's advanced training grounds as Ambassador Cathrix and her delegation followed General Chen toward what the humans called their endurance testing facility. The morning's observations had already strained the aliens' capacity for surprise, but what awaited them would challenge their very understanding of biological limits. This is where we evaluate and push our trainees' physical capabilities, General Chen explained, leading them into a vast indoor complex. The air inside hummed with the sound of machinery and what Cathrix's sensors identified as human vocalizations expressing various degrees of exertion. The first chamber contained rows of humans lifting various weighted objects repeatedly. Some lay on benches, pushing masses above their bodies, while others stood, pulling weights that seemed to defy reasonable limits. The aliens' scientific instruments struggled to process the forces being generated. That trainee, Tlax pointed with a trembling appendage, she's lifting more than twice her body mass. How is this possible without mechanical assistance? General Chen beamed with pride. That's Lieutenant Wang. She's one of our top performers. The human body is remarkably adaptable. The more we challenge it, the stronger it becomes. You mean, Vreen's data collectors whirred in disbelief. The damage from this activity actually makes them stronger. Exactly. We call it muscle hypertrophy. The micro tears in the muscle fibers heal stronger than before. It's a natural adaptation process. Thrix's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. A species that grew stronger from damage. The implications were unsettling. They moved to the next chamber, where humans ran on various machines at different speeds and inclines. Some had been running for what the general casually mentioned was just over 2 hours. 2 standard hours of continuous locomotion. Cathrix's translator actually glitched. Without rest. Oh, this is nothing. General Chen waved dismissively. Humans can run for much longer. We're persistence hunters by nature. Our ancestors would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. The delegation shared a collective moment of silence, their species' evolutionary history of being primarily sessile suddenly feeling like a significant disadvantage. The next demonstration nearly caused a diplomatic incident. A group of trainees were practicing underwater operations, holding their breath for periods that seemed impossibly long to the oxygen-dependent aliens. 3 minutes and counting, announced an instructor, watching a trainee calmly performing complex tasks in a deep tank. This is torture, Vreen exclaimed, their professional detachment finally cracking. No sentient being should be able to survive such oxygen deprivation. Actually, General Chen consulted her tablet. The current human record for holding breath underwater is over 24 minutes, though that's under very controlled conditions, of course. Cathrix had to engage her emergency stabilizers to prevent her crystalline legs from buckling. The idea of voluntarily depriving oneself of oxygen for even a fraction of that time was beyond comprehension. The temperature adaptation chamber proved equally disturbing. Humans move between extremely cold and hot environments, their bodies somehow maintaining function despite conditions that would have caused most species' cellular structures to break down. The human body can survive in temperatures ranging from approximately -50 to +50 degrees Celsius with proper training and equipment, General Chen explained, though we prefer to keep things a bit more moderate for training purposes. The delegation watched as trainees emerged from a freezing chamber, their breath visible in the cold air, only to immediately enter a sweltering hot room. Their vital signs, displayed on nearby monitors, showed remarkable adaptation to the extreme changes. But how do they not shatter or melt? Tlax's scientific curiosity warred with their instinctive horror. Our bodies are incredibly good at thermoregulation, the general explained. Sweating, shivering, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. We have multiple systems working together to maintain homeostasis. The final demonstration involved what the humans called their advanced combat conditioning. Kithrix watched in mute horror as trainees engaged in something called sparring matches, deliberately striking each other, while instructors called out corrections to their form. Notice how they maintain control even while under physical stress, General Chen pointed out. This helps build what we call muscle memory, the ability to perform complex physical tasks without conscious thought. A particularly loud impact drew their attention. One of the sparring partners had been thrown to the ground with considerable force. Kithrix's medical sensors activated automatically, expecting to detect severe damage. To her astonishment, the human simply rolled back to their feet, adjusted their stance, and continued. "Shouldn't we intervene?" Kithrix asked, her voice modulator struggling to maintain diplomatic frequencies. General Chen smiled that unsettling human smile again. "They're fine. This is actually quite gentle compared to full contact training. We save that for after they've mastered the basics." As they exited the endurance facility, Kithrix found herself adding to her mental report. The human capacity for physical adaptation exceeds anything previously documented in known species. Their bodies don't just endure stress, they actively reconfigure themselves to become more efficient at handling it. The implications for their potential in long-term space operations and planetary colonization are concerning. Mind games. The afternoon's physical demonstrations had left the alien delegation shaken, but General Chen's next words sent a new wave of unease through their sensory arrays. "Now, let's see how we train their minds." Kithrix followed the general into what appeared to be a standard educational facility, her crystalline form still vibrating from the morning's revelations. The relative quiet of the building offered a brief respite, though she knew better than to expect anything truly standard from these humans by now. "This is our tactical operations center," General Chen explained, leading them into a vast room filled with holographic displays and simulation pods. "Here's where we develop our trainees' decision-making abilities under pressure." The aliens watched as a group of human trainees engaged in what appeared to be a complex strategic simulation. Holographic battlefields floated in the air, showing troop movements, resource allocation, and multiple competing objectives. Currently, they're dealing with a scenario involving 3 simultaneous crises, General Chen explained: a planetary invasion, a humanitarian disaster, and a potential diplomatic incident. They have limited resources and must decide how to allocate them effectively. Surely such complex scenarios require extensive time for analysis. Tlax inquired, their data collectors whirring frantically. They have 5 minutes to form a response plan. Vreen's secondary nervous system actually shut down temporarily. 5 minutes. For a multifaceted crisis response. In real combat situations, you rarely have the luxury of time. General Chen replied matter-of-factly. "We train our people to think fast and adapt faster. Watch." The delegation observed in stunned silence as the trainees rapidly processed information, formulated strategies, and adjusted their plans on the fly. When an instructor suddenly introduced what they called a curve ball, a complete communications blackout, the humans didn't panic. Instead, they smoothly transitioned to alternative protocols, their efficiency seemingly unaffected. But how can they possibly process so much information so quickly? Keith Ricks asked, her own multi-layered brain struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire decisions being made. Pattern recognition, instinct, and lots of practice, General Chen replied. Humans are particularly good at finding connections and making intuitive leaps. We've learned to trust our gut feelings while still maintaining analytical rigor. The next demonstration involved what the humans called psychological resilience training. The aliens watched as trainees were subjected to various forms of mental stress while being expected to maintain peak performance. Right now, they're solving complex mathematical equations while being subjected to sensory overload, General Chen explained. The goal is to maintain clear thinking even under extreme stress. This seems unnecessarily cruel, Vreen observed, their ethical subroutines struggling to process the scene. On the contrary, General Chen countered, it's absolutely necessary. In real combat situations, you need to be able to think clearly despite fear, confusion, and sensory chaos. Better to build that resilience here than discover its absence in the field. The delegation moved on to observe what the humans called war games, massive simulated battles involving hundreds of participants across multiple theaters of operation. The speed and complexity of human decision-making became even more apparent at this scale. Each team must coordinate their actions across space and planetary environments, General Chen explained. They need to manage logistics, maintain communication, and adapt to rapidly changing situations. Plus, they're competing against other teams who are trying to outthink and outmaneuver them. Ricks watched as one team executed a particularly creative strategy, using what appeared to be a deliberate defeat to lure their opponents into a carefully prepared trap. They're teaching deception. Strategy, General Chen corrected. The ability to see beyond the obvious, to think several moves ahead, to understand and exploit psychology. These are all crucial skills in both warfare and diplomacy. The final demonstration of the day involved something the humans called ethical scenario training. The aliens observed as trainees grappled with complex moral dilemmas under time pressure, their decisions carrying simulated but weighted consequences. These scenarios have no correct answers, General Chen explained. The goal isn't to find the perfect solution, but to understand the complexity of modern warfare and to develop the moral courage to make difficult decisions. As they watched a particularly intense scenario unfold, involving civilians in a combat zone and limited evacuation resources, Ricks found herself adding to her mental report. The human capacity for rapid adaptation extends beyond the physical realm. Their minds appear capable of processing and responding to complex, multi-layered challenges with disturbing speed and creativity. Most concerning is their ability to maintain this high-level cognitive function under conditions that would induce complete psychological shutdown in most known species. She glanced at her fellow delegates, noting their similar expressions of barely contained alarm. The humans weren't just physically formidable. They were training themselves to outthink, outmaneuver, and outadapt any potential adversary. The implications for galactic security were staggering. Breaking point. The diplomatic tour was nearing its end when the incident occurred. Ambassador Ricks and her delegation had been observing what General Chen called a routine training exercise, though nothing the aliens had seen that day could truly be called routine by galactic standards. The exercise involved a simulated rescue operation in what the humans termed adverse conditions. A team of trainees was attempting to extract wounded companions from a hazardous environment while under simulated enemy fire. The environment generators created a harsh windstorm, complete with reduced visibility and treacherous terrain. Standard extraction protocol. General Chen was explaining when the first warning signals flashed across the control room's monitors. One of the environment generators had malfunctioned, causing a cascade failure in the safety systems. What had been a controlled simulation suddenly became dangerously real as actual structural debris began falling in the training area. Emergency shutdown. The control room erupted into activity. All trainees evacuate immediately. Thrix's crystalline structure vibrated with alarm as she watched the chaos unfold. But what happened next would forever change her understanding of human nature. Instead of fleeing, the trainees organized themselves with shocking speed. They maintained their formation, adjusting their strategy to deal with real danger rather than simulation. A section of ceiling collapsed, threatening to trap 2 trainees carrying the wounded companion. They must abandon the exercise. Vreen's voice modulator cracked with distress. They're risking their actual lives for a training scenario. But the humans didn't abandon anything. The team leader, a young human female whose name tag read Rodriguez, quickly assessed the situation and made a series of hand signals. Her team responded instantly, moving with coordinated precision despite the deteriorating conditions. Remarkable, Tulax muttered, their scientific detachment momentarily overwhelming their horror. They're applying their training to an actual crisis in real time. The delegation watched as Rodriguez's team split into smaller units, each moving with clear purpose. One group braced a failing support beam, creating a temporary safe passage. Another helped the trapped trainees maneuver their wounded companion through the narrow space. The third team was already setting up a medical triage area near the exit. Should we not send and rescue personnel? Thrix asked, her diplomatic training barely containing her panic. Watch, General Chen replied, her calm demeanor at odds with the chaos below. They are the rescue personnel. Indeed, the trainees had transformed from students into a fully functional crisis response unit. They moved with efficiency that seemed impossible given their limited experience, making split-second decisions that saved lives and prevented further structural collapse. When a secondary collapse threatened to cut off their escape route, Rodriguez made a decision that left the alien delegation speechless. She ordered her team to evacuate while she remained behind to hold up a failing support beam, buying time for the others to get clear. She's sacrificing herself. Tlax's sensors couldn't process what they were seeing. No, General Chen replied with that unsettling human smile. She's trusting her team. Sure enough, the moment the last evacuee cleared the danger zone, another team had already rigged an emergency support system. They moved back in with protective equipment, secured the area, and extracted Rodriguez moments before the beam would have given way. The entire incident, from malfunction to full evacuation, had lasted less than 15 minutes. There were no serious injuries. The trainees had even managed to preserve most of their training equipment. In the aftermath, Thrix observed something even more remarkable. The humans didn't seem traumatized by their near-death experience. Instead, they gathered in small groups, discussing what had happened, analyzing their performance, and suggesting improvements for future scenarios. They're treating it as a learning experience, she remarked, her voice modulator unable to fully convey her disbelief. Of course, General Chen nodded. Every crisis is an opportunity to improve. Watch this. The general approached the gathered trainees. Instead of offering comfort or suggesting rest, she began a detailed debriefing. The trainees participated eagerly, pointing out both successes and failures in their response. Team coordination was solid. Rodriguez reported, still covered in dust from the collapse, but our initial risk assessment could have been faster. We lost approximately 12 seconds establishing the severity of the structural damage. Noted, General Chen replied. We'll incorporate structural assessment drills into next week's training schedule. Thrix added to her mental report. Most disturbing is not just their ability to survive crisis situations, but their capacity to adapt to them, learn from them, and emerge stronger. They don't simply endure hardship, they actively transform it into advantage. The implications for their species' development trajectory are unprecedented. The report. Back aboard their vessel in high Earth orbit, Ambassador Cathrix and her delegation spent 3 full cycles attempting to compose their official report to the Galactic Confederation Council. The task proved more challenging than any of them had anticipated. How do we explain this? Vreen asked, their data collectors still processing the vast amount of information they had gathered. The Council will think we've been compromised by human disinformation tactics. Cathrix's crystalline form shifted through various colors as she considered the problem. Her previous diplomatic reports had always been models of clarity and precision, but nothing in her extensive career had prepared her for documenting what they had witnessed at Fort Horizon. Perhaps we should begin with the physical data, Tulak suggested, projecting a holographic display of their measurements. The numbers, at least, are irrefutable. The ambassador studied the scrolling figures, human strength ratios, endurance limits, adaptation rates, cognitive processing speeds under stress. Even stripped of context, the raw data was disturbing enough to trigger security protocols in most Confederation databases. No, she decided finally. We need to help them understand not just what humans can do, but what they are. Her appendages moved across the communication interface as she began to compose. 2. The Galactic Confederation Security Council. Subject: Human Military Training Assessment. Priority 1. Esteemed Council members, this report represents the combined observations and analysis of myself and my technical team regarding human military training methodologies. I must begin by stating that our previous assessments of human capabilities were fundamentally flawed, not in their measurements, but in their basic assumptions about what constitutes possible biological and psychological development. Humans do not simply train their warriors. They forge them through a process that would be considered extreme, even by the standards of the Krithtal battle guilds. But where the Krithtal impose their will through cybernetic enhancement and psychological conditioning, humans achieve their results through purely biological adaptation and voluntary psychological development. What we observed cannot be adequately conveyed through standard military terminology. These beings have developed training methods that deliberately expose their young to controlled hardship, not merely to test them, but to trigger accelerated adaptation. They create challenges specifically designed to push against the boundaries of what their bodies and minds can achieve, then systematically expand those boundaries. Most disturbing is their response to failure and crisis. Where most species seek to avoid or minimize exposure to adverse conditions, humans actively seek them out. They deliberately create scenarios of increasing difficulty, not simply to prepare for them, but to expand their capacity to handle even worse situations. They do not merely learn from failure. They transform it into a tool for improvement. The incident we witnessed during our tour, detailed in Appendix C, demonstrates this principle in action. When faced with actual danger, their training protocols didn't break down, they scaled up. The trainees didn't revert to basic survival instincts. They elevated their performance to match the increased stakes. Most remarkably, they treated the entire life-threatening incident as what they called a learning opportunity. Our traditional threat assessment matrices are inadequate for evaluating such a species. How do you quantify the threat level of a civilization that actively seeks out its own limitations for the express purpose of transcending them? How do you calculate the military potential of beings who view crisis not as a challenge to be overcome, but as an opportunity to be exploited? However, I must emphasize that despite these concerning capabilities, at no point did we observe any indication of aggressive intent toward the broader galactic community. The humans appear to view their training methods as a way to protect and preserve rather than to dominate or conquer. My recommendation is therefore twofold. Immediately revise all existing protocols for military interaction with human forces. Their capabilities exceed our current theoretical frameworks for biological species development. Accelerate diplomatic and cultural exchange programs with humanity. We need to better understand not just their capabilities, but their motivations and ethical frameworks. In conclusion, I find myself grateful that humanity has chosen to join the Confederation as allies rather than face us as adversaries. Their potential for both creation and destruction exceeds anything in our historical records. Our best course of action is to ensure they remain committed to the former rather than the latter. A detailed analysis of their training methodologies and observed capabilities follows in the attached appendices. I recommend reviewing this data in small segments, as the cumulative implications may trigger security protection protocols in more sensitive members of the Council. Respectfully submitted, High Ambassador Thrix. Galactic Confederation Diplomatic Court. Thrix reviewed her report one final time before transmission. She had deliberately omitted some of their more extreme observations, judging that the Council would need time to adjust to even this limited understanding of human potential. As their ship prepared to jump to hyperspace, she found herself watching the slowly rotating Earth through an observation port. Such an unassuming planet to produce a species that defied so many of the Confederation's basic assumptions about life and development. What do you think they'll do next? Vreen asked, joining her at the viewport. That, Thrix replied, her crystalline structure shifting to a deep shade of contemplation, is precisely what we need to stay ahead of. They're not just training warriors, they're creating something entirely new, and they're doing it with enthusiasm. The Earth disappeared in a flash of hyperspace distortion, but its implications for the galaxy's future would resonate for generations to come.